All right, we are in Daniel chapter 2. We're going to start in verse number 18. Daniel 2:18. It's a big chapter, this chapter, Daniel 2. It's most famous for what we're going to get to, hopefully, this evening, the famous discussion about the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, which we've talked about him having the dream, what the dream entailed, which is very famous. We haven't got into in the text yet, but we should hopefully get into it here in just a minute. But it's, as I say, it's most famous for that, but that comes in the whole back third, really, of the chapter. There's a lot of setup and a lot of build-up and a lot of, scene building, if you will, to get us there. So we're still in that part of it. And one of the lesser considered aspects of it that we don't consider when we think about this chapter, we just think Daniel 2, oh, that's the dream of the statue with the different gold, silver, bronze parts. But it's before that that's interesting, because Nebuchadnezzar, as you know, goes, we talked about this last week, he calls his wise men, they come to him, and he gives them the ultimatum. Tell me what I dreamed and tell me what it means, or, it's off with all of your heads, basically, and they can't do it. And you can see the exasperation on their faces in your imagination as you read the text. You can imagine just how frustrated they are with the whole situation, not just with the king, but just with the whole situation, because this is like your classic cliched, out of his mind king making requests that cannot possibly be, resolved. Tell me what I dreamed, but I'm not going to tell you anything about it. You just tell me, read my mind, is basically what he's offering to them. But from Nebuchadnezzar's perspective, yeah, he's a loon, but from his perspective, he has these guys who have told him repeatedly, oh, that's what we do all the time. We read people's minds. We tell them this. We tell them that. We look at the stars and we come up with these meanings, and people tell us what they dreamed. We come up with these big explanations. So this is being hoisted by your own petard. They have caused this. They have created this beast, and now it is going to eat them. They never imagined the scenario where the king would have such a dream that is so anxious fueling that he would go to them with this much on his shoulders and say, if you can't tell me what this means because I don't remember, then what good are you at all? He's not just going to let this go, have some pancakes and get over it. No, I'm going to kill you and your whole house if you can't give me the explanation. And they're thinking, nobody can do that. And that's exactly what they tell him. No wise man in any kingdom, anywhere, could go to the king and literally read his mind. That's just a thing we say, they would say to Nebuchadnezzar. It just sounds good on the resume, but no one can actually do that. And so Nebuchadnezzar says, well, that's not good enough, so that's it. I'm going to kill all the wise men. So he sends out his guys, his executioners, to go round up his wise men one by one and kill them. Before you celebrate that, remember that in Daniel chapter 1, we learned that as a result of Daniel being so blessed by God, as he was blessed with the position in the king's court, to be one of those so-called magi, to be one of those so-called soothsayers, fortune tellers, dream interpreters. And also as a result of what Daniel was blessed with by God, is he was given actual divine ability to do that very thing. So while Nebuchadnezzar is sending his goon squad to go kill someone like Daniel, Daniel is actually the one guy who can do what the king needs. And so that's what Daniel says to the executioner. Hold on, you need a dream interpreted? I'm your guy. So that's where we pick up. The executioner allows him to go back home, which is what he's about to do here. He goes to where Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, those other three Hebrew youths in Babylon. He goes to them and he says he wants them to desire the mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. This is a prayer that he's offering to God with them. So he goes to them and he says, here's the situation. He tells them everything I just told you. And he says, now, we need to go to the king, and I'm going to present this vision. But now, this is where we left off last week. You might think, why are we doing this at all? Daniel, you've been blessed by God. You've got the power. All you got to do is go to the king and do it. Daniel still has to ask God. Daniel has been granted the understanding that when the situation comes, he can appeal to God and be given the ability to interpret dreams. God is not turning him into a comic book superhero where now that he's touched the magic rock, he suddenly has superpowers. When the power comes, he can just become Captain Planet and save the day. No, God has said, I'm going to use you. You are my tool. So now Daniel is saying, okay, I'm going to pray to God that this is an opportunity where I can be used. Because if it's not, I'm going to die. Because the king is killing all of those magi. And I'm like number 17 on the list, and the first 16 are already dead. So he's coming after me. So I'm going to ask God, God, can you use me here to interpret this dream? That's his appeal, that he would desire the mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret. Verse 18. To the end that Daniel and those other three would not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And then, verse 19, God answers the prayer. The secret was revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel, the King James says, bless the God of heaven. Does your Bible say gave thanks? Anybody have a gave thanks in verse 19?
Praise.
Praise? Yeah. We hear bless, and we often think of bless as a higher to a lower. I will bless you, but the word just means to exalt, to lift up, to say thank you to, or to praise. Same idea there. Well, no, that doesn't matter. So anyway, yeah, that's what he does. The secret was revealed to him, and so he thanks God, and we'll get the details of that in the verses that follow. Verse 20. Daniel answered. Answered what? Answered God's response to his prayer and giving him what he wanted. So his response to God for giving him the answer to his prayer is, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. This is your power on loan. This is your ability that you are allowing me to just take a sample of and use in this situation. Daniel's not special. Daniel does not think of himself as special. At the end of this, Nebuchadnezzar is going to try to worship Daniel, but unworthily is Daniel of worship. Unworthy is Daniel of worship, because it is God who is special, and it is God who's going to get the praise by Daniel in this text. So he prays to God, please give me your wisdom to interpret this. God does. So he doesn't forget that after he gets it. This is a lesson to learn. Ask God for what you need. There's nothing wrong with that. You would be amazed how many Christians will say, I feel guilty just constantly praying to God about what I need. Well, who else is going to be the provider? That's what the point of it is. I mean, yeah, there are other things to do with prayer, as you see here, to be thankful. But he wants you to make your petitions to him. He wants you to ask for what you need. He wants you to go to him and recognize, I can't do this. I don't have that. I need you to fill in my gaps. So please, God, give. Please, God, help. Please, God, provide. Give us this day our daily bread. You know what that prayer means? It means you're praying the same prayer every single day. Give us this day our daily bread. And if you mean it every day, it doesn't mean anything less. It doesn't get watered down. So he prays, he gets, and then immediately he prays again to say thank you. And you are so good. This is what you have given to me. Verse 20. He changes. He's speaking of God, talking to him, speaking of him in the second person, but it's still addressing him. Verse 21. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. I wonder why Daniel, in the midst of this, now this follows him getting the revelation, right? It follows him being given the secret of Nebuchadnezzar's dream and the interpretation thereof. He's got that now. This is his prayer in response to that. So I wonder why he mentions in his thank you prayer that it is you who topples kingdoms. It is you who raises up kings, because that's in Nebuchadnezzar's prayer. So that's what he's thinking about. So he's thankful to God, not just for getting what he's got, but for the big picture that he's about to reveal to King Nebuchadnezzar. It's you who changes the times and the seasons. It's you who upends the norms of the world. It is you who takes what is the standard way of doing things and creates a whole new way of doing things. It is you who takes when people say, our kingdom will never end, like Rome famously said, our kingdom will last for 700 generations, and then they were gone. You know, it's God who says, no, I'm going to topple you and create a new order, a new system, a new norm. He removes kings and sets up kings. He's the one ultimately in control. And then to me, he thinking of himself, he gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. He takes a person who's not wise and gives them wisdom, so he is wise. He takes a person who has no understanding and gives them understanding, so they can say of themselves, I have understanding. Daniel is now wise. Daniel is now a man of understanding, but the source and the credit stays with God. All right, verse 22. Again, still speaking of the Father. He reveals the deep and secret things. What does your Bible say there?
Deep and hidden.
Deep and hidden? Everyone have something like that? Deep and hidden? Imagine profound and hidden. Okay, that's even better. But let's follow the metaphor for just a second. You have a well. I don't know if you ever had wells when you were a kid. We had a well on, believe it or not, I grew up on a farm. So there was a well that I would take rocks and I would drop into. And you would hear the doink, 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 you know that sound it would make. And then if you listen very carefully, you'd hear the little splash, right? Well, if the well is so deep that you can drop a rock and you can't ever hear the splash, that's a really deep well. There is a bottom, but you can't see it. You can't plunder that depth. You certainly can't see the bottom of that well. But God, in the well of all knowledge, can see to the bottom, and He has plundered all the way to its depths. What did your Bible say again?
Profound.
Yeah, to be profound is to have a deep understanding of something. That's what the word means. So He can take the surface level understanding and show you everything that's underneath, like the iceberg underneath the water. He reveals all those secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light that He shines to know that darkness dwells in Him. It's not like Daniel, where I'm going to shine this light on it. I'm shining this light. Well, where did Daniel get the light? God is the light. God is the source of this understanding. 23. I thank Thee and praise Thee, O God of my fathers, who has given me wisdom and might, ability, power to do this, and has made known unto me now what we desired of Thee. You answered our prayers. For You have made known unto us the king's matter. Thank You, God. We were going to die. And hey, if that had happened, so be it. But we asked You, can we live and interpret this dream? And You have blessed us with the ability to interpret this dream. So now verse 24. Daniel went in unto Arioch, whom the king had commanded to do the executions, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said this to him. He said, quote, Destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. Now, it's a little weird, because if you go back about half a dozen verses or so, to just before Daniel goes to see the three, he's already met Arioch. Arioch has gone to him about to kill him, and Daniel has said, whoa, Nelly, hold on, I can solve this problem. And then he goes to the three, he has the prayer, he gets answered, then he goes back to him, and it almost reads like he's meeting him for the first time. Well, clearly he hasn't, you've already read it before. It's just, it's a narrative tactic to reintroduce the segment. It's to reintroduce you to where you left off. And the whole section of him going away and offering the prayer is just kind of like an interlude. It's kind of like a little side thing, just to get a little explanation, a little coloring before we go back and follow the main thread of what's happening here. The king has a bad dream. No one can solve it. Daniel can solve it. Little side story. How does Daniel do it? By God's power. So we catch back up in verse 24. It summarizes. He went to him as the king was supposed to kill these people, and he said, don't. I don't know how many wise men had already been killed by now. I don't know if Daniel was the very first one, and so nobody has. But clearly he hadn't gotten through all of them, because he says, don't kill the wise men, because I can solve this problem. Now, you might think, well, Daniel, you're leaving these con artists, you're leaving these frauds, these hucksters, you're leaving them to run loose and continue their cons. Well, don't worry. He's about to end all their whole careers in just a second, okay? So keep going. Verse 25. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said this to Nebuchadnezzar, I have found a man. Now, hold on. We'll get there. Hold on. I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. Okay, well, I guess technically. But, I mean, if Daniel had not spoken, he would have found a dude he was about to kill. He didn't find a man who can interpret. He did technically. He found Daniel, and Daniel could do it. But it doesn't sound like he's making this out to be, I, Arioch, son of Balzog, have solved your problem. Please grant me the promotion and the raise of 17%. Doesn't it sound like that's what he's doing? I know we read this and we forget sometimes, but remember, these are real people in real life circumstances, and real people are petty like this. Real people will undercut and scoop and take the glory for themselves if they can. So, and that's what I see Arioch doing. Maybe I'm totally misreading it, but it sure sounds like he's saying, look at me, look what I've done. When all he did was just not kill the guy and allow him to do it. Anyway, 26. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, his Chaldean name, Are you able to make known unto me the dream that I have seen and the interpretation thereof? That's basically the same question he asked all the other guys. He's at the end of his rope. He's exasperated. He's tried and failed with every other person. So he tries one more time to Daniel. He asked them, can you tell me what I dreamed? And can you tell me what it means? Simple question. Verse 27. Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king has demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, or the soothsayers show unto the king. ... He's now are all those other guys they're worthless. You don't need them. They can't do it. None of them. Not a one of them can. You might as well not even have them. Don't kill them. But you don't even need them employed anymore. Okay? The secret which you have, look at what he says, cannot be shown by the wise men, your counselors, your experienced people, your wise old men in the room. They can't do it. It cannot be known by your astrologers, the people who stare at the stars, find patterns, and come up with stories. They can't do it. The magi, the people who say they can talk to dead spirits and say, well, here's what the spirit of your great-grandmother has said. Here's what the spirit of this previous king has said. Who say they can commune with the dead and tell you the secrets. No, they can't do it. The soothsayers can't do it. The people who, throw bones and rocks and cut themselves and they come up with what they say is the future. I'll read your palm and I'll come up with your destiny. They can't do it. So what are you here for then, Daniel? To tell me what I already know? No. Daniel offers him someone who can do it. But he's not like those other ones. Unlike the wise men, Daniel can do it because he's a person with wisdom from the God who gives wisdom. Unlike the astrologers, Daniel can interpret the dream from the God who made the stars. Unlike the magi, Daniel has communed with the living Spirit of God and therefore knows the truth. Unlike the soothsayers, Daniel can tell you what it means and tell you the future that it holds for you, your kingdom, and those that come after. So in one sentence here in this verse, he just completely wipes out the need for any of those other guys. As long as you got Daniel, and as long as God's talking to him, what do you need the rest for? 28.
He's completely wiped out those people and their gods. Because remember last week, they confirmed that their gods couldn't do it.
Yes, that's exactly right. In fact, that's the very next verse. You're exactly right. If you remember, that's what he was just saying last week. We had the setup without even realizing it. They were setting themselves up and their gods for failure by saying, we can't do this. There's not a wise man anywhere who can. And no God, unless you could speak to the gods themselves, they could not do it. And since we talk to the gods and we can't do it, already the seeds of doubt are planted in Nebuchadnezzar's mind that my gods can't do it. My God's people, my God's so-called spokesmen can't do it. And so that seed is there without even realizing it. And here comes Daniel. And he's going to water that seed. First by saying, look at these yucks. They can't do it. Now verse 28. But there is a God in heaven. There is a higher power above us, literally, who reveals secrets and makes known unto King Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. So you have all of your other gods, who have all of these clowns who say they represent those gods. Now what have they done for you? A whole lot of nothing, because you're about to kill them. So clearly you don't need them. And if you're going to kill them and they speak for your gods, clearly you don't need to listen to your God because their spokesman can't help you. You're going to kill them. But there is a God who does reveal secrets. There is a God who can make known what is coming. Your dream, into verse 28. Your dream and the visions of your head are these. And you think, oh, he's going to tell us. No, we have more setup. Look at the next verse. He's just teasing you. He's setting you up. 29. As for thee, O king, your thoughts came into your mind upon your bed, which shall come to pass hereafter. And he that reveals secrets makes known to you what shall come to pass. You dreamed this dream while you were laying in bed. Now, Nebuchadnezzar didn't tell him that. Maybe he told the other ones that when they were there. Remember, he said, I dreamed this dream and I don't know what it means. But he didn't tell Daniel that. But maybe Daniel heard that. Okay, so far, I'm not impressed. Let's see, can he impress me? 30. As for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any other living person. So he first or second undercuts himself. I'm not going to be like those other wise men who come to you and who say, oh, look at this great knowledge that I have that I can make known to you your dream. No, I don't have any great knowledge, he says. I'm not any wiser than any other person who ever has. But for their sakes, the sakes of those clowns that you're ready to kill, so you won't kill them, I will make known the interpretation to the king, that you might know the thoughts of your own heart. I will tell you what the deepest recesses of your subconscious, with thoughts put there by God in this case, are trying to convey to you. Well, if you can't do it, if you're no wiser than them, how are you going to do it? Because, as he said, there is a God who reveals these things. 31. You, O king, here we go, you saw and beheld a great image, the King James says. Does anybody's Bible say idol? What do you have? You have image? Statue? Statue is what it is. The word is idol. You saw not just any old statue, like the Statue of Liberty. No one worships Statue of Liberty. I'm sure there's always one nut. Somebody out there does, but usually we don't. It wasn't just some statue. It wasn't just some monument. You saw what would, to any observer, be an object of worship. Okay, it was that splendiferous. It was that magnificent. You saw this great idol image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent. So he's painting the picture now. All right, we have sunlight. Sunlight shines on objects that reflect, and it creates a sparkling image. And you stood before it, or it stood before you. So, again, the image is being painted. Here's Nebuchadnezzar. He's looking up at this great image. It is sparkling. It is radiant. It is majestic. He's craning his neck to see it all. And the form thereof was, the King James says, terrible. That doesn't mean bad. It means awe-inspiring. What does your Bible say there?
Frightening.
Awesome. Frightening, awesome. To induce awe. You just make the face when you say it. Awe. Right? Frightening, but I don't know if it's frightening in the sense of he was scared of it. That's not really what the word means. The word means you were blown away by it. You were stunned by it. You can see the similarity. A person who's shocked is stunned, but it's they're cousin words, those ideas. 32. This image's head was of fine gold, the breast and its arms of silver, belly and its thighs of brass, its legs iron, and its feet part of iron and part of clay. Now, I shouldn't say 9. I don't know the figure. All stats are made up. Let's say 68% of the images you'll see when you Google like this image, Nebuchadnezzar's statue, Daniel 2, almost all of them will look like your cliched Babylonian dude. It'll be like some guy who has like the weird, triangular beard that they have and the weird pointed hat. So they look like that, and they'll have like their arms are like crossed, and he's standing like that. All right, so you'll get something like that. You'll have the gold here, and you'll have silver and bronze, and this is bronze, this is iron, and this is iron and clay. That's good enough. So, but it always looks like in a lot of commentaries they'll regard it like he saw an image of Nebuchadnezzar. Nowhere does this say he saw an image of himself. All you get is you are the golden head, which we'll get there later. But that doesn't even mean that when you saw the head of this statue, you saw your own face looking back at you. Your kingdom is represented by this element of gold at the top, and then the chest is represented by someone else or something else to come. But I think we jump to a conclusion. We say, he sees this statue of himself. Not necessarily. There's no reason to believe that. That's not the point at all of the image. It doesn't even make sense, because this is not Nebuchadnezzar. This is Nebuchadnezzar. The whole rest of it is someone's else entirely. 33. His legs of iron, his feet of part iron and part clay. 34. You saw till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Nobody's verse 34 has the word mountain, right? It would be a really gross paraphrasing of the text. There is a mountain. The stone that is cut without hands comes from a mountain, but you don't find that until verse 45. It's just a weird way of writing it. It's not included here, but when he gives the retelling of it, when you get the instant replay in verse 45, he'll mention there was a mountain, a stone was cut out of it, and that's where that comes from. Mountains are a big commonality in Old Testament prophecies. And they're not uniform. Like, they don't always refer to the same thing. So you can't say, it's a mountain, so it means this every single time. Sometimes mountains are just in general reference to might and hugeness and scale. So it's just this big imposing thing. Nothing could be bigger than a mountain on earth as they think of it. So the mountain of the Lord's house in Isaiah chapter 2. What is it again? It's not a mountain. It's the mountain of the Lord's house. It's not just a mountain. It's a mountain that is a house, and a house that is as big as a mountain. Those images are kind of molded together. But here's a picture of a mountain, but the emphasis is not the mountain. There's another mountain that's the emphasis. Here, the emphasis is on this stone that is cut out of this mountain that crashes into the feet. Incidentally, the feet, which we've already established, are part iron and part clay. So at its weakest point, at its weakest part, where its foundation is shoddy. You know, like a Las Vegas casino run by the mob. They stuff the styrofoam in the walls to make it cheaper. Well, that's what's going to fall when an earthquake happens. So here's this statue, this foundation is bad, and here's the stone that's cut out of this mountain that's going to roll down the hill and crash into the feet, and it's going to topple the whole thing. And then, as we're about to read, from the ashes and from that stone is another mountain going to rise. But we'll get there in a minute. The point here is the stone, most particularly, what about the stone does he say? What's curious about it? Yeah, what does your Bible say? Mine says, the stone cut out of the mountain, cut without hands. Is that what yours says? Huh?
Mine says cut without human hands.
Yes, exactly. Well, okay, just think about this. We cut through mountains all the time now. I mean, if you've ever driven on the highway and you see these big cliffs on either side of you and it looks unnaturally smoothly cut, it's because we went in there and we cut through that so we could, you ever driven the Bobby Hopper Tunnel to go to a Razorback game? We just cut through that thing for no reason. We could just gone over it. But we cut right through that, right? Well, human hands cut through that. Human hands could do that. Human hands could identify that. But here, the emphasis is on not by human hands. Well, if it's not by human hands, who did it? Beavers? No. Who cut this? God did. So what is about to happen to this statue, which as of now we don't even know what it represents. We're just getting the picture. We are given the first clue of its significance. Something's going to happen by God, who, if you remember Daniel's prayer, raises kings and topples kings. Well, what are we about to see? We're about to see God topple kings and rise from the ashes himself. All right? 35. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and gold, when the stone hit it, broke into pieces together and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors. In other words, it became husk in the wind, dust in the wind if you prefer the song. It just became just nothingness. There was nothing left of it. And the wind carried them away, and no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So this stone crashes into the statue. This all just disappears, and what is left is this mountain that stands in its wake. And that's the end, verse 36. This is the dream. And now we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. So already Nebuchadnezzar is satisfied because this is half of what he wanted. And he's already done 100% more than anyone else has. So let's get the interpretation. 37. You, O king, art a king of kings. Oh, wait a minute. You're not supposed to say that about Jesus, Daniel. No, the phrase means you are the top banana among anyone else that I could find. If I look around and I look for kings, I can find a bunch of other kings and a bunch of other kingdoms. Even Judah has a king right now. But Nebuchadnezzar is the king who rules over all these other kings. He has all these vassal states. He has all these territories that he controls, and they pay tribute to him, and they call him their boss. He's the boss of bosses. That's all the phrase means. We rightly acknowledge Jesus as King of Kings. Do you know why we do that? Because of this prophecy. And what this prophecy is predicting is going to come to pass. When this prophecy is fully fulfilled, and it won't be fully fulfilled until we read Daniel chapter 7, and he talks about the king sitting on his throne, then we will say, now I see a king. And I'm looking at everyone else who calls himself a king, and they are all secondary. He's now the King of Kings. But that hasn't happened yet. It's still in the future. So I look at Nebuchadnezzar and I think, find me a bigger king right now. You, Nebuchadnezzar, you are the King of Kings. Why? Because the God of heaven, same phrase he used earlier, there is a God in heaven who can interpret dreams. Because that God of heaven has given you a kingdom and power and strength and glory. I think it's very important, at least if nothing, it's very fitting that this whole thing started, this conversation, with Daniel saying, I'm not any smarter than anybody else. I don't have any more wisdom than anybody else. But God has given me wisdom. God is a God who gives you everything you have. Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, in that sense, they're in the same boat. God has given me this wisdom to tell you He has given you your kingdom. So God is playing an even field here. He has given you this kingdom. He has given you all the might that you have. He's given you all the authority that you have. You are a king of kings because God lets you be. 38. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, beasts of the field and birds of the heavens, sky, has He given into your hand. Look at all of your domain. He'll talk about almost the exact same phraseology in chapter 4 when he starts thinking of all his domain. He has another vision. He thinks of the scope of his kingdom. Same imagery here. Look at the scope of your domain. All of it because God gave it to you. and he has made you ruler of them all. You are this head of gold. You and all of your scope and all of your majesty and all of your authority is depicted here by this statue's golden head. He's not looking at the statue and seeing himself like his image, like this is me here. And he's looking at the statue and he's saying, this element that is of gold, you represent it, and it represents you and your kingdom and its scope. But, verse 39, and after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to you, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. After you is going to come another kingdom. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is not the first king of the Babylonian kingdom. He's not the first emperor of the Babylonian empire. And so they would not think of it in terms of, after you will come another, and you'll think, well, sure, yeah, my son will reign after me. No, that's still the same dynasty. That's still the same rule. That's the same kingdom. It's just the next guy takes over in my stead when I'm dead. And that rhymes, so it has to be true. What Daniel says is, no, after you is coming a whole nother kingdom, which implies your kingdom is going away to be replaced by another kingdom. Look, you don't just walk up to a king and tell him, here's the expiration date on your milk. You're going to die, and your kingdom is going to die. And yeah, you may have a son that rules after you, and he may have a son, but eventually, sons are going to run out, and a whole new kingdom is going to take over. And they're not going to call themselves Babylon. They're not going to speak Chaldean. They're not going to push Chaldean history. They're going to have their own culture, their own history. They're going to take over your whole kingdom, and they're going to be in power. And they're going to come after you, and that's the silver. Now, that's exactly what Daniel says in the text. So tell me why anybody that you watch on television today who tries to use Daniel chapter 2 to predict the future or to predict the present say, oh, you know, Daniel, he prophesied that we're going to be in these days. These are the days he was talking about, and this is the kingdom that's coming after Nebuchadnezzar. Look at this kingdom over here, and he picks some kingdom, you know, Kazakhstan or something on the map. And that's this, and it's time. And they pull out the map, and it somehow all ties back into Israel of the modern day. And so they tie it all together with Daniel, when Daniel very clearly says, the kingdom that's coming after you, and another kingdom is coming after them. So you don't have to pull out a modern 21st century map. All you got to do is go to history and see, well, now Babylon, you know, okay, all right, Babylon, Syria, Judea, Mediterranean. Now, all right, here's Babylon. After you will come another kingdom. I don't need to jump past the Star Trek symbol, past this cookie man, all the way to the United States of America and try to make an argument about how the other kingdom is the US of A, when it's very clear if I look at history that the kingdom that came after Babylon, that consumed the world after Babylon, was when the Medes and the Persians got together and made their own kingdom and took over and subdued Babylon. Because that's what history says. History proves God's prophecy is true. What came after him? What is the kingdom of silver? It's the Medo-Persian Empire, which is going to be talked about in this book. It is the kingdom after them in this very book, if nothing else. So here is your head of gold. It's Babylon. That one's given. That's a guarantee. But in this very book, the silver gives you the indication that it's the Medo-Persian Empire. But then he says, after you will come the kingdom of brass, which will consume you. What comes after them? Greece or Macedonia. Under that guy, what was his name? Alexander, right? Who basically, you know, cried because he ran out of people to kill. He said, here, I'll just consume this whole known world. Well, that's exactly what Daniel says. He'll third the kingdom of brass, which shall rule over all the earth. Bit of prophetic hyperbole, because he never made it to, you know, Canada, but that's the idea, right? So here we have a kingdom, a kingdom, a kingdom. He's painting a picture that's very linear. You don't need to jump ahead 6,000 years. You just jump ahead 600 years to find the next one. Grace. And then keep going. Verse 40. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things, and as iron breaks all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Now keep going, verse 41. And whereas you saw the feet and toes, part of clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. It's the same kingdom. Okay? He doesn't tell you about two kingdoms. Again, 40 and 41 give you one kingdom. But it's one kingdom that is described in two different ways. In other words, it's not, okay, golden head, Babylon. Number 2, silver, Medo-Persia. Number 3, Greece or Macedonia. Number 4, Rome. Number 5, what came after Rome? Well, the Byzantine Empire, maybe. That's what you'll have. Some commentaries will go there. But he doesn't give you another kingdom. He says, here is the kingdom. It's iron. It's strong. But then, as you know, when iron mingles with clay, it becomes weak. So shall the kingdom be weak, ready for God's stone to subdue it. So it's the same one. So don't let any other commentator or scholar or somebody like that or some loon on the Trinity Broadcasting Network tell you these are two different kingdoms. Because Daniel says it's the kingdom, which is number 4. But then why, Daniel, do you describe it in these two different ways? It starts out with just iron, but then it becomes iron mingled with clay. It's two different things, at least, if it's the same kingdom. Well, kingdoms can change, can they not? We use kingdoms in a very loose sense. Power structures of the world can evolve and change. They can go from one thing to another. It just so happens that the kingdom that came to power after Greece, on a real geopolitical massive scale, was what? Starts with R, ends in O. What was it? Rome. Yeah, exactly. Rome, right? Now, again, different commentators. You'll have people who will say, well, you have, after Alexander died, as you know, he dies and he had 4 generals, and he separated the kingdom in 4 parts. You have, like, from the Judean perspective, the Seleucids were one of them, and they took over Judea, and Judah Maccabee led the revolt, you know. So they'll say, well, that's one of them. Well, maybe, but it's just a sliver. The next time you have a kingdom that is comparable to the ones mentioned before is when Rome took power. But Rome didn't start as this big, sprawling empire. Rome started as what? Starts also with an R, but this one ends in republic. Rome was what? Yes, it was a republic, exactly. And it became a dictatorship. And once it did that, the moment it changed to a dictatorship and a military-led dictatorship, it was able to sweep across Europe and Asia and become a major political force. But the problem was, as soon as it did that, it immediately starts deteriorating from within. And when Rome collapses, it doesn't collapse because one, like here, it doesn't collapse because one big power subdued it. Because one big power subdued it. It doesn't collapse because one big power subdued it. It collapses from within. It collapses because it can't sustain its own largesse anymore. It just became this big, obese blubber of a kingdom, an empire, that was just killed by 1,000 small forces. The Mongols were a big chunk of it, but they didn't defeat them. So it was 1,000 little cuts, death by 1,000 cuts, that took them down. And the reason they weren't able to withstand it all was because they were already weak. Incidentally, that's a whole different thing. That weakness was societal. Their culture was bad, depraved, immoral. I'm not saying the Greeks were moral necessarily, and certainly not the Babylonians. Persians were okay. Of course, they murdered babies like you wouldn't believe. So none of these were necessarily moral, but Rome just took it all to an American extreme with how immoral they were. And so that created this weakness in its foundation, its core. Typically, a big sprawling empire, when it gets too big for its britches, it just shrinks. Look at the British Empire. Big, everywhere. And then, what is it now? It's just an island and a half, right? It used to be everywhere. We speak English in all these foreign countries because England was there. But then they slowly shrank. The Roman Empire didn't just slowly shrink. It just imploded because it wasn't able to withstand from its core what was strong about it. In other words, to put it in an illustrative way, it was iron mingled with clay. That makes sense? That's the way I see it. Now, you'll have other commentators that will make very convincing arguments, perhaps, but to me it makes sense that he is walking you through the history of these major empires from the perspective of it is God that raises up kings and kingdoms. And he's doing it not just for, on a whim. He's not doing it just for kicks and giggles. He's raising up these empires to slowly prepare the world for the right time to come. Incidentally, as we start looking ahead to the stone that becomes the kingdom of Christ, Babylon is conquered by Medo-Persia. All right, big contribution to the coming of Christ in Medo-Persia. They let the people go home. Okay, kind of important. They got to go back to Jerusalem where the Christ will be born. In Greece, they standardized language. Even people in the Roman Empire, they knew Latin, but Greek was the common tongue. Greek was the language everyone knew. It was the default language. In Babylon, or not Babylon, in Judea, they would speak Hebrew all the time. but Greek was just as commonly spoken. They standardized language, which makes it easy, by the way, when you're taking a gospel message all over the world, if everyone has at least one language they all speak. And Rome standardized law and standardized a system of movement with the road system that they had everywhere. So everybody contributed their own part. Well, Babylon didn't. They were losers. But once you started Medo-Persia conquering them, they all contributed something significant to the furtherance of the gospel message. So when you look back, you say, boy, it just seems like God is creating these kingdoms to play their own individual part so that his kingdom, when it comes, can spread, which seems to be what this prophecy is about. Verse 42. Just like toes of feet were part of clay and part of iron, so the kingdom that we're talking about, the kingdom, Rome, we're going to say in this class, is partly strong and partly broken, partly stout and partly fragile. 43. And whereas you saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, and they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mingled with clay. The ingredients of this kingdom's instability are going to be there. They're going to be sown, and they're going to destroy themselves. In other words, they're going to be the reason for their own downfall. 44. And as I said, each one of these is responsible for the destruction of the other one until you get here. And even then you can argue what they changed into was the response for their own destruction. 44. And in the days of these kings, which kings? Because we got hundreds of years, okay? In the days of these kings? No. Well, these were conquered. So these were conquered, and these were conquered. And these are the last ones mentioned. In the days of these kings. So again, I say, don't let somebody tell you that the kings being talked about in Daniel 2:44 is this kingdom over here in the modern day world. And in the days of this coming kingdom over here, this coming empire over here, this coming country over here, that God's going to create his kingdom and so forth. Because Daniel is walking you through the prophecy. So follow Daniel's bouncing ball, and he follows you from Babylon to Medo-Persia, to Macedonia, Greece, to Rome Empire. In the days of these kings, will God set up his kingdom, which unlike this one and this one and this one and this one, his kingdom shall never be destroyed. Okay? He is going to create, as he's about to tell us again, a rock out of a mountain that will destroy. And from its ashes will come another mountain. And if all of these are their own little tiny mountains, they're all going to be destroyed by this rock. His is going to be a mountain that will never be destroyed. Why? Because you're never going to get a rock big enough to destroy it. Incidentally, who cut out the rock that destroyed all these kingdoms? One more time. Where did this rock come from? God. Which means even I couldn't take down Rome. I couldn't take down Greece, or I couldn't take down Medo-Persia. I couldn't take down Babylon. Only God can do that. So I'm sure not going to be able to take down God's kingdom. If I can't even take down this guy, then I'm definitely not going to be able to take down the guy who can take down this guy. You follow? In the days of these kings shall God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. When King A dies, King B takes over. When King A is conquered, King 75, a whole new kingdom now, takes over in its place. Well, no, here's a kingdom that is not going to be left to other people. How is that going to be pulled off? Because the king of this kingdom is just going to never die. I mean, we're going to kill him, and then he's going to shrug it off in 3 days, and then just never die again. And it's then, after he shrugs off death, that he's going to sit on his throne and reign and never die again. So how can you replace him if you can't kill him? But this guy and his kingdom will break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. And it shall stand, his kingdom that is, forever. Verse 45. Now let me explain that. For as much. What's your first word in verse 45? Inasmuch, for as much. To elaborate on. In other words, here's this kingdom that is going to rise from the ashes of this destroyed kingdom that will never be destroyed. Well, how is that? Well, in this way. For as much as you saw the stone cut out of the mountain without hands, and it broke in pieces the iron, brass, clay, silver, and gold, the great God has made known to the king which shall come to pass hereafter, from Nebuchadnezzar's hereafter perspective. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof is sure. The dream is guaranteed, and the interpretation is reliable. This is what you dreamed, and this is what's going to come to pass. You have a series of global influential empires that are going to rise. And then God is going to decide how each one is going to fall. And from the ashes will rise his own. Now, here's two things we do with metaphors or prophecies which are filled with metaphorical phrases. Here's two dangerous things that people do when they read metaphors in the Bible. First of all, they mix metaphors. Well, if this means that, then it could also mean this, and I combine these two. Don't mix metaphors. If I say God is a boat, he's a boat. Boats can burn, God can't burn. Don't mix metaphors, okay? So, don't mix your metaphors, and don't run away with the metaphor. Take the metaphor as far as God wants it to go and leave it there. Because the metaphor is just a metaphor. It's just a story in a short form. All right? God is going to destroy all these kingdoms. But wait, the kingdom of Jesus Christ, according to Acts chapter 2, comes in the days of the Roman Empire, which keeps on going. So the Roman Empire isn't destroyed then. Well, does that defeat the prophecy of Daniel? No, because the point is, Rome will eventually go away. It will crumble into ashes, as did Greece before it, and Medo-Persia before it, and so on. But what is the one kingdom that will exist beyond all the rising and falling of all these other kingdoms? What's the one kingdom that will be here if the world is still here when America is long gone? The kingdom of Jesus Christ, right? What's the one kingdom that outlived the Soviet Empire? It's the same kingdom that will outlive the American Empire, that will outlive whatever empire comes after us if the world is here. That's the kingdom. So it'll all turn to ashes, but his is one that will never be destroyed. That's the interpretation of his dream. 46. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and worshipped Daniel. Well, you ought not do that, but you can see why. This is not the last time in your Bible that someone is going to be given such a huge vision, and the first impulse is to just fall and worship. John the apostle, falls and worships the angel for half a second before the angel stops him, when the angel gives him some big news in Revelation. It's just a common reflex to fall down and be so grateful it comes across a little creepy. So that's what Nebuchadnezzar does. He's also a pagan. He doesn't know anything. So he falls on his face and he worships Daniel and commands that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. Let's take this all the way. Let's offer a sacred cow and let's burn some incense. 47. And the king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings, a revealer of secrets, seeing that you could reveal this secret. Remember way back how this whole conversation started. You, Nebuchadnezzar, are the, what did he call him? The King of Kings. Okay? We bristle at that because only Jesus is the King of Kings. Well, Nebuchadnezzar would agree with you, at least right now. In this moment. He would have not agreed with that estimation at the beginning of this conversation. But having seen all this, and how can you not be blown away by this? Having seen all this, he says, your God is the real King of Kings. Your God is the Lord of Lords. Why? Because he's just been told a story about how Daniel serves a God who's revealed this dream to him, that Daniel serves a God who raises and falls kingdoms by his own will. So how could Nebuchadnezzar not concede that? Because he can only be the king of Babylon. But God says, I will make the king of Babylon, and then I will unmake him and make someone else the king, and I'll still be in power. That's the King of Kings. Your God is a God of gods, because none of my gods or my God's dudes could do this. And your God is the King of Kings. He is a revealer of secrets, because you have revealed this secret. Question: if Nebuchadnezzar didn't know what he dreamed, how does he know Daniel did not just spin the most epic of yarns? Probably because the same God who gave him the dream withheld the meaning of the dream until Daniel revealed it and gave him that intuition to know, oh yeah, that's what I dreamed. I remember now. Yeah, same God. Once you concede God did it, it becomes very easy to answer little nitpicks like that. 48. Then the king made Daniel a great man. Well, he was already a great man. That means influential. And gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, the chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Remember, Daniel, at the beginning of this whole thing, was one of the Magi. And because none of the other ones could do anything in their job, he was going to kill them all, Daniel among them. And now, because this one person had actual power given him by God, he is promoted to now the head over all the Magi.
Why was Daniel not in that initial meeting when Nebuchadnezzar asked for the interpretation?
Well, probably because he was simply not of a high enough stature. Probably Nebuchadnezzar called his most senior members. Because clearly it wasn't like everyone but Daniel, because he sent out the executioner to kill all these guys. Right. So he probably just had like his chief Magi. That's what I would think. Just in the brain.
Young.
Huh?
Young.
He was also very young. Yeah.
They were very young.
So he would have not been one of the senior ones. He would have brought in his chief ones, his eldest ones. Because obviously, you think of it in that terms, if my eldest wise man doesn't know, then no one's going to know. Just so happens God knows. 49. Then Daniel requested of the king And he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Is that the first or the second?
It's after that.
first, but it's.
Well, okay, well, I'm almost done.
Yeah.
Just hang with me. Last verse. He took those three and set them over all the affairs of the province of Babylon. That's to say, the core of the empire of all of it. This province here would have been divided up. He's in charge of that. And Daniel sat in the gate of the king. In other words, he's like the White House chief of staff. He's the guy who's in charge of who goes to see the king, who makes the decrees of the king and talks to him. And he's also the guy, he's the secretary of the Magi now. All right, that's where we end. Perfect. We ended the chapter. We'll pick up with chapter 3 and the story of the fiery furnace. Very famous. Thanks you guys very much.